The title of the conference is very much the driving transformation in health and social care. And there's been a huge amount, we hear that word almost on a daily basis, transformation. Transformation is the thing. And it is. But if we're to be successful in transformation, we need to have an infrastructure around it. We need to have plans. We need to be clear about how we're going to deliver it. But I think importantly, and the link to this conference, is that we need leadership to deliver it. This will only be delivered if the people that are leading the service believe in it, want it to happen, and are committed to delivering it, and bring people with us, because that's the job of leaders. I also think we're in a place, and you've heard me say before, I don't believe the NHS or the health and social care system can survive certainly longer than 5 years, and possibly much shorter than that. So we need to change. There is a burning platform. But we also have to get people willing to change, because not always is it easy to change. Not always is it easy, if you can't see where you're going, to make that commitment. So we have to be willing, and we have to get our people to be willing. In fact, we have to show them that there is a better place. Now, what I'm going to start with is a little video that's just been released in the last couple of weeks by the department, which is looking ahead at how we should transform between now and 2026. So I'm just going to play this because I think it sets the context, both for what I'm going to say, but also for the conference today. Thank you, Connor. Fill the space for Connor to run. Here we go. Yeah. We have 10 years too. Will you, will you be able to switch back okay?
Just having technical difficulties with the audio, so you can get the video to play. But
Just get the video to play. In fact, okay, folks, we're going to cut back to my slides. Essentially, what the department's video was saying was setting the context for transformation. And it was essentially, the key message was, and it was listing out a number of things we've already done over the last 2 years, but making clear that actually the transformational journey is a 10-year one. And for me, one of the things, you know, I like this picture because I like the quote with it, which is, if we're going to lead transformation, it's not about pushing people up this hill. It's not about pushing them to a different place. We actually have to lead them. People have to want to climb to that summit. But the other message for me in this is, because I think there is a lot of portraying that the system hasn't changed, that this transformation thing is new. And as we stand at the foothills of, you know, Everest, it feels like a massive change, a massive climb. Will we be able to do it? But actually, I think we need to glance back. If it's a 10-year journey, let's look back 10 years. Think about your service. Think about where you work. Think about what it looked like 10 years ago. Because this idea that transformation is new is false. Take mental health. Think of the long stay wards where basically people were living in a dormitory with often nothing but a wardrobe between them to separate them for privacy. And we've introduced supported living, people living now in their own home in very different circumstances. You look at children's, how much it has changed in the last decade. Kinship care. 10 years ago, there was less than 100 people, and for not everyone will know, but kinship is where you're actually placed with, if you can't stay with, the child can't stay with their parents for whatever reason, kinship is actually staying with another relative, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, but another relative. Look how much that's changed over the last decade. Fundamental change. When I started in 2009, one of the things that we had at that time, probably one of the 2 or 3 biggest challenges for the Trust, was an RQIA report looking at the governance within children's services. That our record keeping, wasn't good enough, our supervision, our governance systems, whole range of things. Quite a fundamental RQIA report. It was one of the top 3 things. Very different place now. We've seen the emergence of the sanctuary, things like the sanctuary model in the children's homes, the Momo app. We've moved much more to an outcomes-based approach where we're trying to make a difference to children's lives. And we've seen more recently, in the last year, 18 months, the emergence of ACEs. You look at nursing and residential, the typical picture on the left, you know, that sort of sitting around the wall, some things being done, but essentially living away your last days. And then moving again to a supported type model. But it's much more than the accommodation. It's much more than that physical representation. One of the things that really strikes me when you get into a supported system, that system in the old was those older people fitted around us. We determined the schedule. We determined when they get up. We determined when they get fed. We determined when they went to bed, when they took their medicines. In supported, we're guests in their home. It is their home. And they get up when they want. They talk to who when they want. They can go off and watch or listen to whatever they want. So a fundamental transformational change in the way those older people live the latter part of their life. The old Down, the new Down. Massive difference in terms of the facilities. And that's probably the best picture I've ever seen of the old Down. If we'd gone inside and shown some of the things. But it's not just about the building. That is, it's a physical representation of the change. Because actually, when you look at the way the Down has changed over the last 10 years, the bigger change is in what we're doing inside it. The bigger change is in how the role of the Down has changed. And while many people have fought that, we're moving to a model which is much more sustainable. We're moving to a model which actually will give people better outcomes. And if you look at, excuse me, typically, I don't know exactly how many staff, but we would have had a handful of consultants who were largely generalists. The history of the smaller hospitals is generalists, trying to do a broad range of things. So you would have a relatively small number, maybe 10 or 12 consultants who were working across medicine, surgery, obstetrics. We now have 40 consultants with specialist skills going into the Down and into the Lagan Valley, who are taking in expertise, who are taking in specialist care, who are taking in techniques that weren't available in the past, and we couldn't have under that old model. So while the building has changed and very much gives us the opportunity to do things differently, it's what we do inside it that has transformed. If you look at prison healthcare, again, was probably one of the top 3 things when I started, was being told this is one of the 3 risks. And even more recently, when we took over, we didn't have a presence on the ground. Prison officers were managing healthcare, people who knew nothing about prison healthcare. We didn't have a presence on the ground to supervise. There was there was nothing like standards and governance and SQE about healthcare. Fundamental transformation. Reports that have said the public health within the healthcare, the primary healthcare and the public healthcare for offenders was very poor. We're now seeing reports where we're actually scanning, screening, case finding, treating in a very different way. We have much better systems. Transformational in terms of what we have in prison healthcare. Very, very different. And that applies across mental health, it applies across addictions, it applies right across the board. Looking at mental health, that iconic sort of picture of the Downshire. We closed 10 years ago. We still had long stay wards. The last ward closed in 2014. And those were wards, as I said, where people lived essentially in dormitories, often with just a wardrobe between them. That was what privacy was. We've now 50 new places for people to live in the community. We have a massive rise in terms of community-based services, things that we can do, things that we can offer that help people to live in the community. That's the transformational piece. That people with mental health problems are living amongst us. They're part of society rather than being locked up in an institution. We have new services, DBTs and BFTs and CBTs and plenty of lots more TLAs. But a fundamental difference in terms of what we're able to offer to support people. And much more in terms of mental health, like so many other areas where we're getting upstream. We're trying to find the causes, the determinants of what make people unwell. And I think one of the fundamental changes, which is an exemplar for elsewhere, is the Recovery College model. So don't tell me transformation hasn't been happening in mental health. Seamus is probably the only one who remembers this, the swinging 60s. I told you to get me on back, Seamus. And again, many of you will remember these, and while the photograph makes it look cramped, it's not that inaccurate. I remember, walking and things being stored, and often in more recent years where there were also patients on the corridor. But that was a very cramped accommodation. I could show you photographs of when it was vacated. And that just, it looked very dilapidated, it looked very cramped, it looked very, very old. Into the new, and so many, you show the pictures of the single rooms. But again, that's the accommodation. It's been brilliant we've been able to change that. It's brilliant for our staff that are working in a different environment. It's brilliant for our patients that they experience that. But actually, the transformational piece is what we're doing inside it. So we're seeing the emergence of ambulatory services. We're seeing whole new techniques in acute care that we haven't been able to offer in the past. In cardiology with our new CTs, we're at world's first. 10 years ago, we didn't do medical day case. Now we have 6,702. Don't you love him? He's just a walking stat man. I suspect when I check out email, that's probably true, but nobody ever disputes his figures. But it is, again, it is what we're doing is the transformational piece. It's the buildings are so important. They create that context and environment for us. But what we've been doing, the way we've been changing our services, we have been doing transformation for the last 10 years. We've already been doing it. In learning disability, probably isn't all that clear in this slide, but 2008, we had less than 100 people in supported living. We now have 259. In direct payments, so the people are actually, and this is how we're transforming people's lives. Instead of us managing how they get a service, what they get, we're giving people the ability to buy that, to be flexible, to have an input and take control. And that's a big part of it, is they're actually looking after these things for themselves. Less of that sort of paternalism and more control for the person in their lives. So we've gone from 3 service users in 2008 to 142 today. That's transforming people's lives. And critically, the long stay patients in Muckamore, 67 in 2008, we have 2 long stay patients left. That's transformational. So when we're thinking we're starting a transformation journey, we've been on it. Our staff have been doing it. You have been leading it. It's happening in corporate areas. It's happening in our technology. I was trying to think, what did my phone look like 10 years ago? This picture, you can see that we had a board we used to write with pen up on the patient's details. We used a phone to try and contact the person we needed to speak to. We now use Vocera. Look at the size of the computer on the desk. And now we're using mobile devices, electronic whiteboards. The ability to get clinical information, manage patients, has been transformed by technology. But we don't see it because we're on the journey. What about our culture? And there are other corporate things, like so many things. The idea to do this, probably as usual with me, came a little bit late in the day. So on Monday and Tuesday, I was sort of, directors, please send me anything you think, what is the 3 biggest things you think have changed in the last 10 years? And so last night, there were still things coming through. Margaret was sending me stuff about how allied health professionals have changed and how the community equipment. Now we have you have the iPad and you can show people what they want. You can nearly order them there, whereas it used to be dragging things out of the back of the car and carrying these equipment. Again, transformational. We've changed in corporate services the way we employ people, the use of bank, where we used to use agency 10 years ago, quite fundamentally changed. We now have shared services. I could go on and on. But our culture, and I think you've seen this one, I use this slide a lot, the journey we have been on for the last 10 years to transform what is important. So in 2009, I think that this is transformational. Only 1 in 2 of our staff thought that quality of care was our top priority as a health and social care organization. I don't know what they thought we saw as important, or what we did see as important, but I think that's an indictment. And we weren't different. It wasn't that we were any different from the national. I mean, that's where it was. It was post the Francis report. Nationally, it's got a little bit better, but we're now at 4 out of 5 of our staff think the quality of care is our top priority. To me, that is one of the most important. We get our staff survey. For me as a leader, that is one of the most important questions to go to. What do they think we think is important? What do they think is our priorities? Because it has to be quality of care. It has to be safety. It has to be the quality. It has to be the user's experience. It has to be embedded in our culture. And this is, for me, why this is one of the most fundamental questions, one of the most important. That's what staff are telling us what they think we see as a priority. Again, I think that is transformational. So, what do we need to do then? I mean, context is so important, and I think that piece around, and we need to take that message out. We need to remind our staff they have been doing transformation, and they have been doing it without the gift of the 200 million that we're getting in this 3 years. So this idea that we're standing in the foothills of Everest is a nonsense. You know, we're probably, you know, whether we're at 5th camp or 4th camp, but we're well up that mountain. And in fact, it's not about reaching a summit. This is a journey. We will continue to change. When the money runs out, the transformation monies, which is very welcome and will help to aid this process, we will still continue to change because it's part of our culture. So the first, in terms of what we need to do, the first thing I think is recognizing the position we're in, because this is very much the platform, and it is, there's nothing new in this. This is the, if you like, the demand of demography. It's the burning platform. It's the thing which is driving the need for change, which is fundamental to why we're going to have to change. I recently saw this slide, and I think, you know, that there's 2 or 3 things here which I think just bring it into focus. Between now and 2026, that 10-year period looking forward, the population will increase by just over 77,000. The population of over 65s will increase by 74,500. So actually, all we're really doing in terms of changing the population is, as we are, everybody getting a little bit older, but we're also dropping in almost 750,000, 75,000 older people into our population. So in terms of us becoming an aging population, I think that's, you know, virtually the whole growth is going to be older people. Now, I'm not going to try and explain this one in any great detail, but essentially the black line is the population in 2006, and then the bars are 2016. Now, the interesting thing is almost the baby boomer bit of this, because what you can see is back in 2006, that big sort of bulge, if you like, for both males and females, back then was the sort of 35 to 45-year-old. It's now the 45 to 55-year-old. In 10 years' time, the baby boomers start to reach 65. The other important piece in this is there are 2 sort of very significant indents, if you like, 2 areas where the population is much narrower. Both of those, that's the sort of 10 to 20, and the sort of 35 to 40 sort of age group. The important message in that, the bit to take out of this, is we're going to have more over 65s, but we're going to have less people who are the people that will be economically active to pay for it. That's the fundamental challenge for the NHS. That's why it cannot go in its current format beyond 5 years. It's going to become unaffordable. Now, in terms of saying what do we need to do, we need to recognize that. But I think one of the challenges now for us looking forward is educating the public, our politicians, and the wider system about this, because this is a societal issue. It's not about how we deliver healthcare and how we deliver social care. This is a societal issue, and we need to consider this as a society. And I think that's going to open up some very big discussions. But we have a role to play as leaders. We have a role, all our staff, to take this debate back out to our families, to our communities. It's just another example of the number of admissions projected to hospital And we could do this, if we do the domiciliary care piece of this, we're expecting a doubling of the requirement for domiciliary care. So we're increasing virtually 10% every year for the next 10 years. Massive increase. And we know we're struggling to sustain domiciliary care at the minute. We'll have 13,000 more hospital admissions by 2026. But we'll have 26,000 more admissions of over 65s. So actually the 0 to 65 population, the admissions are going to drop. We have a tsunami of demand coming from older people. We're already experiencing that, but this isn't sort of a nice smooth line growth. We're accelerating. This is an exponential growth. And that is the fundamental challenge for us, and we need as a society to consider that. But we have to, as leaders, take that debate out. But it's not just, I don't want to leave it as just, it's just a sense this is an over 65, this is an older person problem, and the implications of all of that for the different parts of our service. Because it's happening, and this is one of the opportunities for us to correct it. It's happening, the onset of diabetes, which is, as we've seen, it's grown 5% per annum for the last 12 years. And it's going to continue to grow. Now the onset of this starts, and if you look at the sort of normal distribution of chronic disease, because we're talking about diabetes, we could talk about respiratory, I could talk about blood pressure, I could talk about a whole range of other things. These things are starting to occur, these are occurring, and the onset and the things that create the conditions for them start much earlier in life, and then we start to see them climb in the 40s and 50s, particularly into the 50s. So this is mapping with that demographic map as well. But it's not just aging. So many areas, we're getting better at keeping preterm babies alive, but that's a huge success, but there are consequences in terms of long-term complex healthcare needs. We're seeing big rises in, and a lot of focus recently on the infant mental health strategy, but also the children and young persons mental health issues. Major issues there. Poverty and inequalities. We still have, as a society today, children who go hungry over the summer because they're no longer getting a school meal. It's quite well researched that actually the educational attainment, the ability to achieve educational attainment, if you like, falls away because they spend we have children in this country today that go hungry over the summer, may have only one meal a day. So when they go back to school, they've fallen away. So in terms of the things that are driving the determinants of health, there's issues around poverty and inequalities. We're seeing also issue around the impact of drugs and drug usage across our society. So there are many more areas I could pick. But the question for us is, how do we respond to that? And in a way, the answer, I think if you look back to maybe the slides that I've used or the messages over the last couple of years, a lot of these aren't new. But it's back to that sort of quote from an old mentor of mine who used to say, leadership is actually 95% perspiration and 5% inspiration. So a lot of it is, and his other famous quote was, we shouldn't be plucking feathers from passing geese. The idea that there's some new solution out there that we grab as it goes past is a nonsense. The issue is we redoubling our efforts on the things that we know will make a difference, the things that we have been doing that are starting to make a difference. So it is about early intervention, and we're seeing more of that right across our different programs. In children's, we've got ACEs. In hospital, we've seen, particularly in areas like diabetes and respiratory, where people are getting upstream and looking at the determinants of people becoming unwell and trying to prevent that, and in cardiology as well. It's happening in mental health. It's happening in a whole range of areas. So it's about redoubling our efforts, that we want to get upstream. We want people to help people to age better. Think of that fundamental shift with some of those transformational things we've already done. where people maintain their own choices about what time they get up, what they eat, where they go. It's evidence-based that that actually helps them sustain their independence. They stay well longer. So changing the model. We want to keep people well. We want to maintain independence. At the start of life, we want to have a good start for children, good start to life, and for people to lead fulfilling lives. Say we used this slide last year. It is about trying to, and a major strategy, and I think one of the very hugely positive things in children's is the 5 trusts are doing this together. There's a common agreement about this is the priority. So ACEs and signs of safety, addressing poverty, so that we're all working as a system to try and get upstream and prevent the need further downstream. Now, I also think there's a reason for us to be optimistic, and you'll have heard me say this before, but this is the sort of program for government framework where there are 12 big outcomes. You recall we used this slide. I used this slide last year, those of you that were here. And in a sense, the challenge for us is how do we, if we're trying to deliver an outcome, because this is one of the things that's really difficult for us to see, and certainly difficult for our staff to see, is if we're trying to deliver an improved outcome, like a better start in life for children, what is it we do? In the past, what we've done is said, we'll do this little initiative which we think will have an impact, but our ability to actually connect that and demonstrate that it will have an impact has been very poor. This was our first effort at it last year, using driver diagrams. So what are the primary drivers, and then what are the secondary drivers? And I'm definitely not going to try and explain all this one to you, but we have the opportunity now. I think this is a really exciting piece of work that's been undertaken by Roisin's team, by Emma, by Dean, and by some others, that we actually now are going to look at, and this will be available, and this is what I want to be available to all of us. We all start to use this, and that we fit in what we're doing to this, and that will help to crystallize out for us and our staff how we're contributing to the big outcomes. Now, the bit at the top is the sort of program for government peace. So that top row. The bit below that is our outcomes, and then the indicators that are going to be used both by us and by the region. So if you look at the Northern Ireland measures around things like healthy life expectancy, preventable mortality, percentage of people who are satisfied with health and social care. Then we look at what are the trust using as indicators. So we'll have reductions in unplanned hospital admissions and a range of other things. This is just illustrative. Then we go back to the third area, which is, well, what are the actions we take to deliver the improved indicators which will link to the outcomes? So things like enhanced care at home, and then how we present it in terms of back to those 3 questions that many of you will see in the accountability reviews. How much did we do? How well did we do it? And critically, how is anyone better off? Now, you won't really get a sense of that, but Emma and her team are actually going to do demonstrations of this at lunchtime if you want to pop into, which? The Glen Suite. But what I think we need to do is grow this for our staff so that we can go back and we can show everything we're doing, how we're contributing. So if you go back to what's our goal, more early intervention to help health outcomes, we can actually start to link on one system. Now, our aim is to develop this, put it on our intranet. I would like to see where we actually have this public facing. And so we will then be driving our contribution, and we can see every member of our staff will then be able to see how we are contributing to improved outcomes. Now, this is transformational in terms of how we're reporting. The other thing I think we need to do is we need to start using some of the tools around using how we use the data, things like run charts. We're ahead of what anybody else is doing in terms of this. There's no one else who's produced. The civil service have not produced this. I think this is quite transformational. This is revolutionary. and will help to simplify it. It doesn't look simple on one screen, but when it's on your screen and you can play about on it, you click on those actions and you drop down in and you see what's happening. So we will actually be able to give our staff access, and it will be, once you start playing with it, it's very easy. But we're going to have to upscale in terms of how we measure and how we evaluate and how we demonstrate what we're doing is making a difference. So if you like, what in terms of the we musts for us as a leadership community to do transformation, the first is that getting that recognition, responding, educating, and aligning with that explosion in the demand of demography. But also, and there is again, this is down to the persistence and the perseverance, we keep building the capacity for transformation. We've seen that in the last 10 years we've been doing a lot, but we need to keep building our ability to transform and improve. We've trained now at the different levels almost 4,000 of our staff. I know of no other organization that has trained that many, or is it that far on in terms of building the capability. Now there's the building the capability piece, but it's the impact that has in terms of empowering our people, giving them the skills, creating that environment where they can change the service for the better. And that's what we're trying to unleash, if you like. I think the vast majority of our people in our organization want their service to be good. They want it to be better tomorrow than it is today. By giving people the skills and creating the culture and the environment around them, that unleashes that potential to make our service better. Is this just, I'm huge, in a sense, SQE is my child. I'm very devoted to it. Nobody can tell me it's ugly. But there are this report which came out by CQC last month is a massive endorsement of what we're doing. Now, the context was it was looking at quality improvement in hospitals in England. But all of what is in there is applicable to health and social care. The fundamental principles are the same. But here's a couple of quotes from Ted Baker, who's the CQC's chief, and that's the regulator in England, the chief inspector of hospitals. They found that in the organizations they rate, the very top, the limited number of organizations that are outstanding, quality improvement was embedded in them. This is a finding which massively endorses the use of quality improvement. The best organizations have quality improvement, not something that they're dabbling at. They don't just have a program, it's embedded. It's how they do things. Staff were engaged. There was a focus on quality of care. And staff, because build the capability, were confident that they could improve their piece of the world, their piece of the service. And they had that confidence, they had that skill, and that's what was taking, for me, that's what's taking those organizations to the outstanding level. This is a massive endorsement. People actually haven't woken up to how much this is an endorsement. He also said it isn't easy, and our journey hasn't been easy. But the organizations that do it, because what you're actually doing, it isn't training 3,700 people. It's changing the way you manage services, the way you deliver services. You're actually changing the behaviors and the culture of the organization. That's why it's not easy. But it has a massive impact on the quality of what we do. The other important piece, which I think is almost, it falls into almost the welfare piece for our staff. We know that our staff are under increasing pressure every year as we go. One of the findings here is the trusts that had QI embedded are better able to cope with that pressure because people are able to respond to it. They're able to adapt to it. Now, this isn't a magic fix. I'm not saying, great, we do QI, therefore we're not going to feel pressure. We know the pressure is out there, but it helps staff cope with it on a day-to-day basis whilst we transform the model at a macro scale. So, my third we must do is listen to Don. It's not back to Scarface or whatever Don Bradley. Not quite Don Bradley. Don Berwick, who's, is one of my hero figures. He recently gave this talk, and a slide, you probably won't be able to read it, so I'm going to take you through the 5 elements of it. But he was saying in terms of the survival of the NHS and fundamental lessons for the NHS. First was you cannot cut your way to efficiency. Now, how much have we seen in the past where we need to save money, let's salami slice. So we just take a little bit off everybody, we'll just sort of turn everything down, we'll cut things, and we'll survive. Wrong. We do have to find out what the opportunities for efficiency. We do have to find where there's waste in our system, and we've been good at that. We've been good at digging those things out. But don't forget also that when we improve our quality, when we regularize our process, when we reduce risk, when there's less people getting infection, that actually saves money. When there's less people needing a service, that saves money. When we reduce variation, when we know that all the evidence is that we get it right 50, 60% of the time as a system, but those other 40, 50% of the time tends to cost more because it's inefficient, it's wasteful. So that getting the quality right every time actually creates a greater efficiency. So we keep seeking that, and that's part of why we want to regularize, why we use things like checklists, why we use things like protocols, because that actually creates a savings that we don't see. You cannot blame your way to safety, is the second big lesson. I think this is massive post-Bawa Garba and some other things that we've seen, is there is undoubtedly a growing fear about what happens when mistakes happen. Who is it is going to be, what does holding to account mean, which is the emerging term. Staff are worried about that. Well, we have to create the culture, we have to build the systems where it is safe to speak up, where actually it's the right thing to do and it feels like the right thing to do, so that we learn and we improve. We have to avoid, and I spoke recently to the medical staff from the Ulster, and I said, this is really important to me. And it has to be really important to all of us in our areas. We don't blame people for things that go wrong. We're in a complex system, things will go wrong. We have to create the culture where it's safe to focus on things. Now, it's not sort of great, everybody can make mistakes, because actually what we've got to get better is at preventing them. But creating a culture where people feel safe to have that discussion. And it's not about blame. You cannot exhort your way to excellence. It's not, me standing, do better. Right, go out here, do transformation. It actually has to be about a lot of the things we're doing, which is redesign processes, using quality improvement, testing will things work better, creating that culture again where people can actually embrace change, redesign things, test things so that they do get better. You cannot require your way to engagement. So it's not a case of, right, we want you to engage or we're going to engage with you. It's actually about creating invitations to people, creating an environment where people think they are part of the debate, they can contribute to it. Again, I come back to the likes of the Recovery College, which is a fantastic model for that. How do we do that within our teams, for our teams internally, but how do we also do it for the public and the users of our service and for our citizens? And you cannot hospitalize your way to health. We've never eradicated a disease by treating it. Back to the early intervention, we have to get upstream. We all can play a part in that, and that has to be a challenge for us all. The next area in terms is that partnership piece, that co-production. This is a slide which IHI have used. There's almost been 3 eras in the last 10 or 15 years. So, the first era, going back probably to the turn of the century, targets, sanctions, inspections, all things we're very familiar with. Then we've seen, and there is that CQC report is a massive endorsement for that actually quality improvement is a better way than regulation and inspection. And there's a growing awareness of that. But the third level, when you go back to the quality improvement piece, we're well up that second curve. We're well up that. Most organizations are further down it. But the third, and this is where we are, as we are towards the top of that, how do we leap to the third curve, which is about the mobilizing social action. Now, what does that mean? The first one is very much around performance management, targets, sanctions, things we're familiar with. The second, quality improvement, which is empowering our workforce to do things differently. And we know we've hundreds of projects now that have come through SQE, lots of projects and things that are happening and improvements which are happening outside that because we've created that culture. But actually, fundamental to that third piece is empowering people to look after themselves, empowering people to have an input into where they're at and their care. And it's actually, there's an element of this which is actually about the power. Where does power lie? And this is, and many of us have been familiar that in the old performance system, heading off to Service Development Unit or SDU and Huey Mullen and all those guys. And it was all about, what are you doing? It was the big stick. It was trying to bully you into performing better. It doesn't work. The quality improvement is us sharing the power. I mean, the fundamental principle of SQE is people actually own their own service. And they have the authority and the permission to improve their service and judge success for their service. But in mobilizing social action, co-production, we're actually ceding power back to the citizen, giving them, that's going to be a fundamental transformation because we have actually, one of the features, I think, of the system, the health and social care system, the NHS, is over the last number of decades is we've become quite paternalistic. And people actually give up almost the control of what their health, what happens to them because they're seeing the professional, they're coming into the health and social care system. We need to give people back ownership of what happens to them. This is about ceding power. I used this slide last year, and it's a quote which I think is one of the biggest tributes we can pay to Recovery College, which was when Maureen Bisignano, one of my hero figures, she tweeted this and said, "What I have learned from Recovery College in Belfast today can transform healthcare worldwide, right across the world." She thinks it's that important. It was that good because co-production and social support equals better health. Ceding power so that people take more control. This was an event I was at yesterday, and it was a winner of a Dragon's Den, where a group of, the band was called On the Spectrum, and I think the key's in the clue's in the title. And actually where the power was ceded back to them, they were deciding what was important in their progression, their development as young people. So they'd formed a band, and they actually played at the Regional Social Work Awards and Nursing Awards, the regional program for social work and nursing yesterday. So another example of it. But what it does is it changes the ownership of health and wellness. It changes the ownership of who controls what happens. And Rodney Morton was at the event yesterday, and he talked about what we create, we own. He was quoting Myron, I think it was. I don't know who Myron is, but I thought it was a very sensible quote, because it goes to the root of, if people help create their own care plan, they create what happens to them. It's the root of SQE. Why do we find that staff love to engage in quality improvement, but spread is much more difficult? Because we own the thing we create. We have ownership of it. But when we take the power away from people for what happens to them, they have no ownership of it. So we have to give that ownership. We have to change the relationship. When we do that, people will make more informed choices. Some of you will remember Denise's story, which was the former nurse who got osteoarthritis. And she came into our service and we saw as a very difficult patient. She basically put on a huge amount of weight. She had problems with mobility, a huge amount of weight on. We saw her as a problem patient, didn't turn up and didn't. And then when she came into our service, eventually and to the credit of 2 OTs, occupational therapists, she was being assessed for a wheelchair. And they basically said she's too heavy for the wheelchair. This was, I think she'd reached over 400 pounds. It isn't safe. But instead of just, it isn't safe, they turned to her, they ceded power, and they said, we don't know what to do, help us. And that changed the relationship with Denise. So she then started to participate in what happened. She ended up starting a working group in arts and getting others in that position because she suddenly was involved. It changed the relationship. I just think the 2 OTs that did that, they're heroes. They transformed that life, the life of that individual, but there's an example for us all there. Suddenly, Denise took control of what was happening to her. Co-delivery. There's also even a little bit of a selfish piece to this, which is it's a more sustainable model. If people take more ownership, that's the getting upstream piece. They'll actually help us to deliver things, not always just about us delivering. Final piece in terms of what we must do is lead through our behaviors. This is the leadership conference. We've got our leadership strategy, collected, and Mara led the work on this, and it'll be no surprise that when we read it, it's very familiar to us. It's lots of things. There's a lot in there which is about collective leadership style, the compassionate leadership style, but a lot of what's described you'll be familiar with. But let's boil it back to, what will it really look like? How will we act? How will we behave if we're going to actually live this? As you know, I'm a big rugby fan. And I would like to point out the guy just on the right-hand side here, when we do celebration later today with our teams, I'm not expecting to see too many people necking bottles of champagne, please. But there's lessons from different environments. And the guy who I think is the best coach in world rugby and is probably the best, I think is the best coach Ireland have ever had, Joe Schmidt. A few months ago came out that he doesn't really do all the sort of leadership stuff, but he has one book that he uses. And it's a book called Trust Rules by a guy called Bob Lee. I love how the world's best managers create great places to work. And essentially he's saying is the book is saying, and Bob Lee is actually very American. He works in the A Good Place to Work Institute. You know, but actually it's the root of the whole thinking, which is you create a good place to work, you will do better. One of the lessons for us in this is he describes that every organization, there are 3 sets of relationships, 3 really important relationships. The employee to their direct line manager, to the person that manages them. So that could be somebody working in a home, the officer in charge. It could be the supervisor in a community team. It could be a supervisor in patient experience. It could be a band 4 over band 3s. It could be a ward sister in a ward. The employee to the organization and the employee to other employees. Now what he's saying is, if you get all 3 of those right, that's the ingredient for a really successful organization. But 2 out of 3, you don't get 2/3 of the really good performance. You have to get all 3 to deliver. And there's a lovely quote in it which I think links back to what we're trying to do. A great place to work is one where you trust the people you work for. You trust the person that you're working for. You have pride in what you do and what the organization does. And you enjoy the people you work with. And at the root of all of those You get all three of those right. You deliver that. That's what makes it a great place to work. And that's what delivers the really good performance. So what are the lessons for us? If we're going to create this, if we're going to create that sense of it's a good organization, but also in terms of that direct line manager, and expecting that of our community of leaders, because I think we've worked hard on that, having that community of leadership. And the employee to manager, every one of the people that is supervising somebody else is a leader. They're part of that community of leaders because they're the ones that are defining what the front line feel and whether we're delivering on these three. So what do we have to do? What are the behaviors? We deliver what we say. When we say we're going to do something, and it's often the little things. I'll get back to you next week. We'll do a plan on that. We'll have a look at that. We're judged on whether it's easy to throw out a few words which we move away from that situation. But people fundamentally judge us on whether, when we tell them something, we deliver it. That can be difficult sometimes, and that leads to the second one, which is give it straight. People are quite happy to hear hard messages. What they don't want, they lose trust in us as leaders, or their leaders, when we soft soap it. Oh yeah, we think it'll be better next week. I think we'll be able to get you that. And we get out of the situation. We've got to give it straight. People can cope with it straight. They also want to know there's something in the distance. There's some way we can change things and improve things, but it won't be easy. They can live with that. But what they hate and where they lose trust is if we don't give it straight. We need to listen to people. We need to hear what they're saying to us, and then we need to listen some more. That's a critical behavior for us as leaders. For me, one of the things which I think really in the last couple of years is, as leaders, who is it we actually serve? We think about, what's our purpose? Who are we here for? And I see too many people who it's about trying to impress, well, in days gone by, the minister. We don't have one of those. Or the department or senior people up, and sorry, Trust Board, sorry, Chairman, the people above them. But if your job's leadership, the people that really matter, the people in terms of what they think of you, is the people that are actually expected to follow you. Do they trust you? Do they have that trust? Is that how they see you? Do they see you as a leader? Because actually, if our job is leadership and the people who we're supposed to be leading don't have faith in us, then we can't fulfill our fundamental role, which is leadership. So I'm a great believer in servant leadership. And I think we need to remember who we're here to serve as leaders. And that's our people, the people in the organization. We get that right, we'll deliver much more strongly than anything else we do. And the other piece is, in all of this, there's lots of storms, there's lots of difficult scenarios. Keep our focus on the goal. Where are we trying to get to? What's our objective? What's the outcome? So for all of us on our teams as leaders, we keep reminding them where it is we're going to. What's the objective, the big goal? I think Albert Einstein said it. It's about being of value. It's about making a difference to people's lives. That ultimately, people who chase trying to be successful, it's like, let's do the performance piece really well. You can get caught up in the process. Keep an eye on the goal, because that's where the difference, the adding value will come. I also love this, which is, I think it's not in a sense for us, but I think to deliver, but it's something we should remember, which is our job to try and grow the economy, or is it to help people thrive? And our job is very much in that latter. We need a society that makes us thrive and makes the people we serve thrive. I think the economy will look after itself if we get that right. Does anybody know? This is my other sort of. This is my one of my going to be one of my new things. Does anybody know what humbition is? Humbition. The modern, and one of the things you'll get from the collective leadership piece is that actually the modern leadership, and this is researched across a whole range of areas, and everybody knows it, is the most effective style of leadership is one which is modest, which is value-driven, which has humility. All these studies and research which shows that's the style of leadership that is most effective. And when you look across the successful organizations and the leaders that have been there for a long time, that tends to be the feature of the leadership. But often, and it's you look around the world leaders, you know, that very humble leader Donald Trump, you know, and across, and there's an article in the Harvard Business Review, which when you look across so many of, you know, the FTSE top 100 and you know, they appoint people who are brash and loud and arrogant because there's this almost belief they're the people out there fighting, they're the ones making the noise, they're the drawing the attention, they're the, you know, the big and brash and Donald Trump like. But actually that's not what delivers success. But don't make the mistake of thinking the humble leader is meek and weak, because that's what the humbition piece is. The good, humble leader, the collective leadership, the compassionate leadership, we must also have ambition. And you can have the humble leadership and the ambition, and that's the piece which actually gives the most effective. We want to be ambitious to transform. We want to be ambitious to deliver improvement. We want to be ambitious to make a difference. We want to be ambitious for our teams to succeed. And you can be hugely passionate about that and still remain humble and modest. That is the most effective leadership style, and that's the behaviors we have to exhibit. It isn't just, you know, sort of quietness and you can have that, but with a hunger to make a difference. And that's the gold standard for us. That's what we're seeking. This is the article from the Harvard Business Review. It essentially catches that. Arrogance makes the headlines. Humility makes a difference. So for us, it is chasing out that, this is the style of leadership we want, but driven to make a difference, passionate about being value-driven, passionate about transforming. This is also a quote from, because the other piece, another behavior we must exhibit, and you've heard me say this before, but I think this is this recent quote from Lord Pryor about the NHS in England. And it goes back, I think the roots of this go back to the Thatcher days, which was creating competition, creating that sense of boundaries, and we've, you know, since had trusts and foundation trusts, and actually we've lost that sense of identity within the NHS, and we're creating these islands that are competing, that are actually detrimental to the overall performance of the system. That's true in Northern Ireland, and we have to break that down. We think we're the best. We know we're the best. But actually, is that the goal we want? To be the best in Northern Ireland? What about if the 5 trusts, or the 6 trusts, including the ambulance service, made Northern Ireland the best? We can do that. The key is collaborate. We're not islands, and we have to encourage our people. And we're some of the worst at it. We're some of the most guilty at it. We have to reach out. We have to create those connections so that our people can work with others, and we create a Northern Ireland answer to these things, that we create a system-wide solution. And we may well have to be the ones that lead that. But as a behavior, That's one of the things we've got to do. And finally, as a behavior, remember who the heroes are, and also don't let them forget it. And look at what our heroes, our people, have done in the last decade. That transformation piece. We look back, in some ways I think we're near the summit of Everest. We've shown we can climb. Our people have led transformation before that term was ever heard of. You look at the Chairman's Awards this evening, the SQE projects, all the initiatives and the awards that our people are in for. The examples I see daily of that compassion that people exhibit. It's rooted in our culture. We don't always get it right, but the vast majority of times we do. And we have got to keep celebrating that, because that's the showcase, that's the example. That what they do in adversity, in many cases, and under pressure many times, is absolutely brilliant. I was thinking, we have this evening the Going the Extra Mile award. And it just struck me as I was thinking about this. Imagine how far we'd travel if we put all the extra miles together. And every one of you can see examples of how your teams, your people, do something above and beyond, day and daily, every day, every week, every month. Imagine the distance if we totted that up, where we'd get to, where we'd go to. Because people are doing it on a daily basis. You know, and we know the examples, you know, the district nurse that plows through the snow to get to a client, the person in working at a children's home who stays in overnight because the weather's bad and they mightn't get there the next morning. The admin member of staff that stays in, the patient experience member of staff. We even have today, Aideen, who broke her foot, got a lift in, came in by wheelchair so she could be here at the entrance today. We have people right across our system who go the extra mile every day. Imagine the distance if we totted those miles up. We've 20 people who are here for awards tonight, or 20 people that have been nominated, and we've 3 that will be here in the Chairman's Awards tonight. But there are hundreds, thousands across our organisation that do that. And they do it a lot in adversity because they care. You won't be able to read this, so I'm going to read it out to you. But this is, again, Don Berwick, my hero. And I think, because one of the things that's, I think, the most difficult and characterizes what our people do, is they do it. That quote of quality is doing the right thing even when it's not seen. They do that all the time. It's not for glory. It's not for that. Remember the leader that's arrogant and brash and all about them? It's not all about them. It's because they care. And I love this quote because I think it catches it, because a lot of what they do means it never is seen. The names of the patients whose lives we have saved can never be known. Don was talking about patient context there, but that's equally true. The child that is given the opportunity that doesn't have to go into care, that's avoided. It's the same thing right across our different programs. Our contribution will be what did not happen to them, which goes unseen. And though they are unknown, we will know that mothers and fathers are at graduations and weddings they would have missed. And the grandchildren will know grandparents they might never have known. And holidays will be taken, work completed, books read, symphonies listened to, gardens tended, which without our work would never have been known. And that's the work of our staff. That's what they do on a daily basis, which goes unseen. When they do it well, there isn't something, and there's far too much attention. We have to learn from the incidents of harm, but all of this is forgotten. We have our own versions of that. Those are slides from last year, a letter that I'd received from a woman about care in one of our wards in Lagan Valley. Their utter humanity and compassion leading up to, actually during, and immediately after my mother's death was overwhelming. They don't do it because they want to be the center of the stage. They don't do it for award. They do it because they care. This young woman is now one of, I've never met her. I think I know her aunt, which is how I saw this, but she's sort of new hero for me. Her name's Rachel McGriffin. You probably won't be able to read this, but she, wherever David is, she's just left the domiciliary care worker to become a midwife, so keep an eye on her. She's in her midwifery training. But I think the message she says, just when you read the words, is hugely powerful. One of the last few times I will wear this uniform before I start a new life. I have been a community carer for 2.5 years. I have fed, medicated, washed, dressed, cleaned the homes of, reassured, and been friend to pillar to over 150 people suffering age, disease, and disability. So right across programs of care. Good carers are in the majority and will change lives. That matters. It matters to families, to the healthcare system as a whole, to society, and it is invaluable to the people that need it. I am proud to say I did this job, and with an amazing team of women and men who commit themselves to helping a very helpless section of our community to live as normal. Unseen, I think, out of the mouth of babes, this young woman has said, we've employed people to come in and tell us about our adult social care reform. But at the root of that is this is a very special job which isn't valued enough. But our people do it because they care. And another great philosopher, transforming isn't some big thing that TIG decides. It isn't some big macro project. It's what our people do. All of those little improvements, all of those things, when we glance back and are inspired by what they have done already, and which you have led and helped to create, those small things, which at times almost seem ordinary, are the basis of us doing an extraordinary transformation. I think we as leaders are hugely privileged because we get to lead those people. I think there is no walk of life that I would rather be a leader in than of the people that change people's lives on a daily basis. And they do it because they care. We as leaders are hugely privileged to lead them. My final reflections, the corporate plan isn't, the words in it aren't accidental. We want to make this a great place to live because you're likely to be well and independent longer. A good place to work. Bob Lee says it, we'll do better, but also that's for our staff. We have to look after our staff as well. And a good place to receive care and support. Live our values and culture. Live those leadership behaviors. We want to continue to build that culture because it's why we're successful. Be the leader you would want and exhibit ambition. Humility in leadership, but driven by a passion to make a difference. Value driven. Let's really do co-production. It's not this as a priority for us. I've said to the SQE program this year, I want that as a priority. Let's really get the users involved with our services. Let's really change that. Let's really do co-production, lived experience, Recovery College, Denise. Those are the examples that we're going to do everywhere. And don't be scared of transformation. Make our staff understand that actually they've been doing it. It's nothing new, and we can rise to the challenge. And we owe it to our staff because their jobs get harder every day. If we transform the service, then it becomes sustainable. So we as leaders, that's our biggest challenge, to do it for our heroes. Thank you.